I'm Lucille Keifer. I am the game designer of Sherlock Holmes Moriarty's web, and the purpose of this little video is to just talk some Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty's web strategy. So if you've been playing the game, and especially if Moriarty is kicking your butt a little early on, I've got some good tips I think will really help with that. Watson and Lestrade have the best sort of defensive early game powers. Watson's a really, really good person to have go first because when you start off the game, you don't have much of a case yet. You have a pretty small board, and Watson can pretty much protect all of it. So if you have a good Watson, on your first turn, he's protecting 2 important clues and probably 2 other players, so that means they can't get kidnapped. Lestrade is also deceptively a really good person to have go first. What he can do is he can jump from whatever tile he starts on into the tile that you identify as the most important tile in play. Like maybe it's the tile he brings onto the board, maybe one of the other characters is on a clue that solves a lot of crimes and you just want to protect it, make sure it isn't an orphan that's very vulnerable to getting, stolen by Moriarty. He can do that. Even if you just connect up a clue to a crime, then it's not an orphan anymore, and he's the only character who can do that. In terms of real, nice, aggressive, easy-to-understand powers, Sherlock and Irene. Once you start getting farther along, you want to give Sherlock to somebody who's got a good puzzle brain, basically. Because on Sherlock's turn, he can absolutely, and probably should, just take the whole board apart and put it back together in such a way that, Watson can protect all of the important stuff. You've probably realized that Mrs. Hudson is kind of sleeper the best piece, especially if you're playing a 5 or 6 player game where there are a lot of powers she can choose from every single turn. She's a little bit more of a trade-off if you're playing a 3 or 4 player game, although it can be kind of interesting to play a game with essentially 2 Sherlocks and a Mycroft. That's an interesting game. So the other thing I just wanted to talk about was the situations where you should be picking all of these tiles. For your first turn, you basically always should pick a location. You should pick a location until you get a black-bordered Moriarty location. Then you need to get him at the scene of the crime. Just protect this location with whatever you got, or have a backup location. The informants, which are all the same, by the way, they're all completely identical, which is useful, I think, because they get kidnapped a lot, so if you want to replace them, you kind of can. They have a lot of connections on them. They have the most patterns, but they don't connect to Moriarty and they don't connect to crimes. However, they will connect any single evidence tile to any other evidence tile, just 100%. So they're a really good piece to have if your board's been split in half, or you absolutely have to connect something up next turn. They're a sure thing. Most of the time, you're going to be choosing whether to draw a witness or draw a clue, because witnesses and clues are the only ones that actually solve crimes. And the main trade-off here is that witnesses have more patterns on them, which means they connect to more things. However, witnesses are a lot more vulnerable. They get kidnapped more, statistically, than each individual clue. So protect these. Clues are good if you have maybe 2 or 3 unsolved crimes on the table. Once you start getting into 4 and 5 and 6, things are getting a little more dire and you want to start going into witnesses. The same percentage of them solve crimes, so one of them isn't actually better than the other, they're just more necessary for different circumstances. Since it is a cooperative game, it actually plays kind of nicely as solitaire. If you're playing a 2-player version, what you want to do is each player picks who they want to play, and then you have a third communal character that you both control. And I usually like to use Mrs. Hudson as the communal character because that just sort of makes sense narratively. So I'll play a game where 2 players will be Holmes and Watson, and then Mrs. Hudson is both of them. If you disagree on how to move this character, then this character's turn gets skipped. Well, I hope that this has given you some stuff to think about for your next playthrough of Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty's web. If you like this content, please subscribe to keep up to date with what's going on with Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty's web and the whole Keifer Art team, our newest projects. If you have any of your own strategies, like what combinations of characters you like, if you've got any house rules that you like, please write about them in the comments. I love that kind of stuff. Thank you so much again for watching. I got the original art right here. Isn't that cool? He's modeled after Pat Garrett. He's the lawman who shot Billy the Kid.
think there's some Nick Cage in there too.